The day my granddaughter got married, I sat at table 11. I know that doesn't sound like much. Tables don't have feelings. Numbers don't mean anything unless you let them. But when you've spent 31 years making Thanksgiving dinners from scratch, when you're the one who taught your daughter-in-law how to make pie crusts that didn't fall apart, when you drove 4 hours in February to help paint the nursery before each of those grandchildren was born, table 11 means everything. The head table had 12 seats. My son was there. His wife was there. Her parents were there. Her sister and her husband. The bridesmaids and their dates. The groom's college friends. I was at table 11 between my son's coworker's wife, a woman I had never met, and an empty chair where someone had apparently decided not to show up. I smoothed my dress, the navy one I'd bought special for this day, and I told myself it was fine. I told myself seating charts are complicated. I told myself my granddaughter had a lot on her mind. I told myself a lot of things that evening. I got very good at it. My name is Marion. I am 68 years old, and I have been telling myself things were fine for longer than I care to admit. I retired 3 years ago from a job I held for 26 years, office manager at a medical practice outside of Columbus. I was good at it. I kept things running. I remembered birthdays and insurance renewal dates, and which doctors took their coffee with sugar, and which ones didn't want to be spoken to before 9 in the morning. I was, as my boss, Dr. Tu Kessler, once told me at my retirement party, the person who held the whole place together without anyone realizing it. I thought about that a lot in the years after. The person who held things together without anyone realizing it. My husband Frank passed away 11 years ago. Heart attack. He was only 61. We had 34 years together, raised our son Marcus in a house on Birchwood Drive, took vacations to the Outer Banks every summer, argued about the thermostat, made up over coffee the next morning. When he died, I learned how to be a person alone. It took a while. I won't pretend it didn't. But I had Marcus. And then I had his wife, Danae. And then I had their children, Tyler first, then Aubrey, 3 years later, and then Carly, who got married on a Saturday in October at a venue in downtown Columbus with Edison bulbs and eucalyptus centerpieces and a seating chart that put her grandmother at table 11. I should back up. The seating chart wasn't where it started. It was just where I finally let myself see it clearly. It started, I think, around the time Marcus and Dana bought their house. They were stretched thin. 2 kids in daycare, a mortgage they probably stretched too far on. Dana working part-time because the daycare costs swallowed her whole paycheck anyway. I understood all of that. I had been stretched thin once too. So when Marcus called and said they needed help covering a car repair, I said yes. When they called the next month and said the furnace had gone, I helped with that too. I told myself that's what family does. Frank's mother had helped us once with a roof repair we couldn't afford. I was just continuing something. What I didn't realize was that I was starting something. The calls became regular, not always large amounts. Sometimes it was Tyler's soccer fees. Sometimes it was a credit card they'd run up over Christmas. Once it was a weekend trip for their anniversary that Dennis said they really needed because they'd been so stressed. I wired the money. I told myself I was glad to do it. They had my credit card number for what started as an emergency arrangement. Marcus had asked for it one year when his truck broke down and he needed a rental to get to work while it was in the shop, and it was easier to just give him the number than to wire funds that might not clear in time. After the truck was fixed, I forgot to ask for the arrangement to end. Or maybe I didn't forget. Maybe I just didn't want to have that conversation. By the time Carly got engaged, they had charged roughly $22,000 on that card over 4 years. I know the exact number because I am the kind of person who keeps records. I have a folder. I've always had a folder. I told myself each charge made sense in the moment. I told myself it added up faster than I expected because I wasn't paying attention. But that wasn't entirely true. I was paying attention. I just kept deciding that saying something would cost more than the money itself. When Carly got engaged to her young man, his name is Ryan. He's a perfectly nice person. He sells commercial real estate and coaches youth baseball on weekends. She called me first. She called me before she called her other grandmother, before she called her college roommate, before she posted anything online. That meant something to me. It still does. We talked for 45 minutes. She told me how he proposed on the hiking trail where they'd had their third date with a ring that had belonged to his great aunt. She said she was nervous and happy and that she couldn't stop her hands from shaking. I told her I remembered that feeling. I told her I remembered that feeling. I told her it was a good kind of shaking. I thought about that phone call a lot in the months that followed. The wedding planning is where things started to feel different. I was not asked to help plan. That I understood. It was Carly's wedding and Dana was her mother, and I was not going to insert myself where I wasn't wanted. But I was also not asked to contribute in any of the small ways that, in my experience, grandmothers usually are. Not to address envelopes, not to taste the cake, not to offer my mother's punch bowl for the rehearsal dinner, which I had offered and not received a response about. I drove to Columbus once in the spring and took Carly to lunch. Just the two of us. She seemed rushed. She kept checking her phone. She said there was so much to organize and her mom was handling most of it. She said she was grateful I was coming. She seemed to mean it. I paid for that lunch, 2 salads and iced teas, and I paid without thinking about it because that is who I am. When I got home that evening, there was an email from Danae. I had been hoping she might reach out, maybe to coordinate, maybe to talk about my dress, maybe just to check in. The email was one paragraph. She was asking if I'd be willing to contribute to the rehearsal dinner costs. I sat with that email for a long time. I didn't respond right away. I made myself some tea and sat at my kitchen table and thought about the $22,000 in my folder and thought about the lunch I'd driven 4 hours round trip to have. And then I thought about Carly on the phone, shaking hands, happy. And I said yes. I contributed $3,000 to the rehearsal dinner. I was not invited to the rehearsal dinner. I found this out not through a phone call or an email or any kind of actual communication. I found it out when I asked Dana what time I should arrive, and she said after a pause that it was just immediate family and the wedding party, and I might be more comfortable coming the next day when there was less chaos. I want to say I pushed back. I want to say I asked the obvious question about what $3,000 bought me if not a seat at a table. But I didn't. I said I understood and I hung up the phone and I stood in my kitchen for a long time not knowing exactly what I felt. The wedding itself was beautiful. I mean that with no bitterness at all. Carly was luminous. Ryan cried when she walked in, which made me cry, and the woman at the empty chair beside me at table 11 offered me a travel pack of tissues from her purse without comment, which was the kindest thing that happened to me all evening. During cocktail hour, I stood near the bar and waited to see if any of my family would come find me. Tyler, who is 24 now and works in IT, stopped to hug me and tell me I looked nice. That meant something. Aubrey, who is 21 and studying nursing, brought me a small plate of appetizers because she'd noticed I was standing alone and said quietly, "Grandma, I saw the seating chart. I'm sorry." I didn't say anything. I squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry." I didn't say anything. I squeezed her hand. Marcus passed by twice. He said hi. He was busy, I told myself. It was his daughter's wedding. I told myself a lot of things. At dinner, I ate the chicken option I had selected on my RSVP card 3 months prior and listened to the speeches. Dana's speech about Carly made the whole room laugh and then cry. It was a good speech. I can appreciate that even now. There was no speech from me. I had not been asked. When the cake was cut, Carly found me at table 11 and hugged me and said she was so glad I was there, and I held her and meant everything I said when I said she was the most beautiful bride I had ever seen. That moment was real. I'm keeping it. But walking to my car at the end of the night, alone, in my navy dress, I thought about the folder. I thought about $22,000 and $3,000 more for a dinner I didn't attend. I thought about Frank and how he would have sat next to me at table 11 and made some quiet joke about it that would have made it bearable. And then I thought about how I didn't have Frank and how I had been making things bearable on my own for a very long time, and how I was starting to understand that no amount of making things bearable was going to change what table 11 meant. I drove home in the dark, and I thought the whole way, I want to explain something about who I am before I tell you what I did. I am not a dramatic person. I do not make scenes. I do not send long, angry emails or call people out in front of others. Frank used to say I had the patience of someone who had decided long ago that most things weren't worth the fight. He was right, mostly. I had learned early that keeping the peace was usually easier, and I've gotten so practiced at it that I sometimes forgot that keeping the peace was a choice, not a requirement. I had a friend, Roberta. She moved to Phoenix 3 years ago. We still talk every Sunday, and she'd been telling me for years that I let people take advantage of my patience. She wasn't unkind about it. She'd say, "Marian, you're not being generous. You're being erased." I didn't want to hear it. I told myself she was projecting. The night of the wedding, driving home on 70 East, I thought about what she'd said. Erased. That was the word. I had not been seated with my family. I had not been asked to speak. I had been asked to give money and then managed at a careful distance, included just enough that I couldn't quite name what was wrong. Because that's the thing about being erased. It happens in increments small enough that each one alone seems like it could be explained. It's just a seating chart. It's just one dinner. It's just that things were hectic. But I had a folder, and the folder told a different story. I didn't do anything right away. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that what happened next was not a reaction. It was not a moment of anger. I don't make good decisions when I'm angry, and I knew that. So I gave myself time. I spent 2 weeks going through the folder. I pulled up 4 years of credit card statements. I wrote things down in a notebook. Amounts, dates, what they were for when I knew. I wasn't building a case. I was trying to be honest with myself about what had happened. Then I called my bank. I told them I needed to remove a secondary card holder. They walked me through it. It took 11 minutes. Then I called my estate attorney. I had a will that left the majority of my estate to Marcus, and through him, to Tyler and Aubrey. I had not revisited it since before Frank died. My attorney, a quiet, careful man named Jim who I had known for 20 years, listened while I explained what I wanted to change. He asked me a few questions. He did not add commentary. When I was done, he said, "I can have a draft for you by the end of next week." I said that would be fine. The new will established a trust. Aubrey was named in it significantly. She had sat with me at table 11 and brought me appetizers and held my hand. Tyler was included too. He had looked me in the eye and said I looked nice. Marcus and Denna would receive considerably less than they had expected. That isn't cruelty. That's accounting. I also contacted my insurance agent and removed Marcus from the secondary beneficiary position on 2 of my policies. I updated the beneficiary on my IRA. I did all of this over the course of about 3 weeks, quietly, in the mornings before my second cup of coffee. There was no dramatic moment, no speech, no confrontation at a Sunday dinner. I just updated my paperwork, the way a responsible person does. The phone call came about a month and a half after the wedding. Marcus called on a Wednesday. He needed help with something, a water heater this time. They'd woken up to no hot water and the plumber was saying it would be over $2,000 and could I put it on the card. I told him the card had been closed. Silence. He asked when. I said a few weeks ago. I said I had been meaning to mention it. Another silence. Then he said he'd figure something out and the call ended quickly. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment. My heart was beating faster than I'd expected, but underneath that, something else, something quieter and more solid had settled in, like a piece of furniture finally placed where it was always supposed to go. Dinah called 2 days later. The call was longer and less quiet. She said she was surprised. She said they had come to rely on that arrangement. She said she wasn't sure what had changed. I told her that was a fair thing to say. I told her the arrangement had been in place for 4 years and had grown beyond what I had intended, and that I thought it was better for everyone if we reset. She asked if this was about the seating chart. I said no. Then I said, actually, yes, that was part of it. I told her that I had sat at table 11 at my granddaughter's wedding and that I had contributed more money to this family over the past 4 years than I had spent on myself, and that I had given it freely and without conditions. But that I had reached a point where I needed to be honest about what I was doing and why, and that what I was doing was not being generous. It was making myself small in exchange for being tolerated. She didn't say anything for a moment. I told her I loved my son. I told her I loved their children. I told her I was not walking away from this family, but I was no longer going to arrange my own finances around keeping the peace, because the peace I had been keeping was costing me things I was not getting back. We talked for another 20 minutes. It was not easy. I am not going to tell you it was clean or that she took it graciously, because she didn't entirely. There was some crying. There was some raising of her voice. At one point she said she felt blindsided, and I said gently that I understood that and that I imagined it was probably not a comfortable feeling. I said that carefully. I hope it landed. Marcus called the following Sunday. He did not yell. Marcus has never been a yeller that he gets from Frank. He said he wanted to understand what had happened, and I could tell he was trying to be fair, which I appreciated. I told him about the folder. I didn't recite numbers. That felt like a weapon, not a conversation. But I told him I had been keeping records and that when I looked at them honestly, I could see that the arrangement had grown in ways neither of us had talked about openly, and that was partly my fault. I told him I should have said something sooner. I told him I was saying something now. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Mom, I didn't know you felt like Table 11 was a thing." I told him I knew he didn't know. I told him that was also part of what I needed him to understand, that I had spent a long time making sure people didn't have to worry about how I felt, and that it had never actually made things better. It had just made me easier to overlook. He didn't have a good response to that. I don't think there is one, really. We talked for an hour. At the end of the call, he said he was sorry about the seating chart. He said it hadn't occurred to him how it would feel. I told him I believed him. I do. We agreed to have dinner the following month, just the two of us, at a place we used to go when he was in his 20s. A diner out on Morse Road that somehow still exists. We agreed to start there. Aubrey called me the week after that. She had spoken to her dad. She called to say she was glad I had said something and that she had noticed more than I probably realized over the years. She said she loved her parents, but she had been uncomfortable at the wedding too. And she hadn't known how to say so. I told her she had shown up with a plate of appetizers and offered me her hand, and that was more than enough. I told her that was the exact right thing. She laughed a little. She said, "Grandma, it was pigs in blankets." I said, "Sometimes that's all it takes. I am not going to tell you everything is repaired. That would be too easy and it wouldn't be true. Marcus and I have had 3 dinners at that Morse Road diner. We are slowly becoming something I think we should have been working toward for years. 2 adults who care about each other having honest conversations rather than careful ones. It is slower and quieter than I expected. Some dinners we don't say anything particularly important. But we show up and he looks me in the eye, and that is not nothing. Danae and I are cordial. I think we will probably always be cordial in the particular way of 2 people who have said difficult things to each other and chosen to keep going anyway. That's not a bad thing. I've decided cordial is fine. Tyler calls more now. I don't know exactly why, but I think he noticed something shift and it made him pay attention. He asks how I am and actually waits for the answer. Last month, he drove up from Columbus on a Saturday just to fix my back gate, which had been sticking since spring. He stayed for lunch. He told me about a woman he'd been seeing. We talked for 3 hours. Aubrey texted me memes. I don't always understand them. She explains them patiently. I love her very much. Carly sent me a card in December, 4 months after the wedding. She said she had been thinking about our 45-minute phone call on the night she got engaged. She said she was sorry the day itself had been complicated. She said she hoped we could have more of those long calls. I called her that same evening. We talked for almost 2 hours. I keep that card in the kitchen near the window. I think about Frank sometimes when the house is quiet in the mornings. I wonder what he would have made of all of it. He was not a man who held on to things, but he was also not a man who let himself be invisible. He had a way of being present that I envied sometimes, this quality of taking up exactly as much space as he was owed and not apologizing for it. I am still learning to do that. I am 68 years old, and I am still learning that being easy to overlook is not the same thing as being kind, and that making yourself small does not actually make anything easier, it just makes you smaller. I think about what it cost me, Those years of telling myself each thing was fine. The money I can account for in a folder. The rest of it is harder to measure. The phone calls I didn't make. The opinions I kept to myself. The moments I decided the peace was worth more than my own presence in a room. But I also think about that October night, driving home on 70 East in the dark, and the decision I made somewhere between the State Route exit and my driveway. Not a decision made in anger, a decision made in clarity. The kind you can only get to after you've been honest with yourself about the whole picture. The folder, the empty chair, the quiet walk to the parking lot in a navy dress. There is a certain kind of freedom in deciding you are not going to explain yourself anymore. Not the angry kind of not explaining, not slamming doors or sending emails you'll regret. The quieter kind. The kind where you close a credit card account and update a will and drink your second cup of coffee and feel, for the first time in a long time, like someone who is managing her own life. I sat at table 11, and then I went home and I got to work. I've been thinking about what it actually means to enable someone. Not in a clinical way, just in the plain everyday sense of the word. Because for a long time I thought I was being generous. I thought I was being the kind of mother and grandmother that Frank would have been proud of. The kind who shows up and gives and doesn't make a fuss about it. What I didn't see, what took me 4 years and a seating chart and a long drive home in the dark to understand, is that there's a version of giving that isn't generosity at all. It's avoidance, dressed up as love. Every time I said yes to a request because I didn't want the discomfort of saying no, I was teaching my son something. I was teaching him that I didn't have limits. I was teaching his wife that my feelings were negotiable. I was teaching everyone around that table, in ways none of us ever said out loud, that I could be managed, that I would smooth things over, that I would sit at table 11 and be grateful for the chicken. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with, because I played a role in all of it, not in a way that erases what happened. What happened is still what it was, but in the sense that I kept the dynamic going by never naming it. I thought staying quiet was the considerate thing. But consideration that only ever moves in one direction isn't really consideration. It's just self-erasure with better manners. What I know now, on the other side of those 3 weeks of early morning paperwork and honest accounting, is that the people around us can only treat us the way we show them we expect to be treated. That's not blame. That's just how it works. Marcus didn't think the seating chart was a thing because I had spent years showing him that things like that weren't things. I had trained him, and Dana, and maybe even myself, to believe that my comfort was always the least urgent item on the list. Changing that didn't require a confrontation. It didn't require anger, which I'm grateful for, because anger would have given everyone a reason to make it about something else. What it required was clarity. A folder, an honest conversation with myself about what I had been doing and what it had cost me, not just financially, but in the quieter currency of self-respect. Audrey brought me pigs and blankets at a wedding reception because she noticed I was standing alone. Tyler drove up on a Saturday to fix a gate. Those things happened after, not before, and I really do believe that they happened because something shifted in how I held myself. You cannot ask the people around you to see you clearly if you have spent years making yourself easy to overlook. I am 68. I am still learning this, but I am learning it, which is more than I can say for the version of me who sat down at table 11 and told herself it was probably fine. It wasn't fine. And admitting that, quietly, to myself, on a drive home in October, was the first genuinely generous thing I had done in a very long time. Generous to myself. Which, it turns out, is where all the other kinds of generosity have to start.